How to let God's love answer your doubts. There are moments when doubt does not arrive loudly. It settles quietly inside you. You still pray. You still believe. But something feels unstable. Questions begin to rise that you never wanted to ask. You wonder if God hears you. You wonder if His promises still apply to you. You wonder if your faith is weaker than it should be. And what hurts the most is not the doubt itself, but the guilt that comes with it. Because no one ever taught you that doubt can exist without destroying faith. What if the presence of doubt does not mean distance from God, but honesty before Him? What if the questions you are afraid to voice are the very place where God's love wants to meet you? You are not broken for questioning. You are human. And God's love is not fragile. It does not collapse when you ask hard questions. It does not retreat when certainty fades. It remains. It listens. It answers in ways deeper than logic. If your heart has been heavy with unanswered questions, if your faith feels tired instead of strong, this message is not here to correct you. It is here to hold you. Because God does not ask you to pretend you are certain. He asks you to stay open. And when you allow His love to enter your doubts, something unexpected happens. The questions lose their power to isolate you, and trust begins to grow in places fear once occupied. Many people think doubt means the absence of faith, but in truth, doubt often emerges where faith has been exercised the most. It is born in hearts that trusted God through seasons that demanded endurance beyond emotional capacity. You believed when things were uncertain. You believed when outcomes did not change. You believed while waiting longer than you thought you could endure. And eventually, something inside you grew tired of holding hope without understanding. Faith rarely collapses suddenly. It weakens slowly, almost imperceptibly, not because belief disappears, but because it is forced to endure too much without relief. Doubt does not arrive screaming. It settles in silence, growing quietly in the spaces where prayers went unanswered and explanations never came. You did not stop believing. You kept believing while carrying disappointment, confusion, and unresolved pain, and that is precisely why doubt appeared. This exhaustion is rarely acknowledged. Instead, people blame themselves. They assume something is wrong with their faith, that they should be stronger, more confident, more certain. But faith is not meant to operate under constant strain. When faith is stretched without rest, questions naturally arise. Not because you want to challenge God, but because your soul needs reassurance that it is still safe to trust. Doubt, in this sense, is not rebellion. It is fatigue. It is the voice of a heart that has been faithful for a long time, and now needs to be held rather than tested again. God understands this distinction. He does not confuse honest questioning with rejection. He knows when a soul is resisting Him, and when a soul is simply tired of carrying unanswered prayers alone. A fragile faith is not a broken faith. It is a faith that has lived through real experiences. Faith that has never suffered rarely doubts. Faith that has walked through loss, silence, and delay often does. And God is not threatened by that fragility. He does not step back when certainty weakens. He steps closer. What makes doubt painful is not the question itself, but the shame attached to it. Many people feel they must hide their uncertainty to remain acceptable before God. They learn to perform strength instead of admitting weariness. They silence their questions instead of allowing them to be seen. But hidden doubt does not heal. It isolates. And isolation is where fear grows stronger than truth. God's love does not require you to arrive confident. It does not demand polished faith or perfect trust. It meets you at the point where your strength ends. The fragility you feel now is not evidence that your faith is dying. It is evidence that your faith is honest, exposed, and still reaching out instead of shutting down. Doubt often appears not to destroy faith, but to invite a deeper one. A faith no longer based on effort, performance, or endurance alone, but on relationship. Before God answers the questions you carry, He answers something far more important. He reassures your heart that you are still loved, still seen, still held, even while uncertain. Faith does not mature by force. It matures when fear loses its authority and love takes its place. And in this moment, before any explanation is given, God's love is already answering your doubt by staying present. Your faith feels fragile because it is alive, and living faith responds to pressure. God is not disappointed by this. He is fully present within it. There are doubts you allow yourself to think, and there are doubts you never say out loud, not because they are dangerous, but because you fear what they might reveal about you. You worry that admitting them would mean you are weak, ungrateful, or lacking faith. So you keep them hidden, buried beneath polite prayers and familiar words, hoping they will fade on their own. But unspoken doubts do not disappear. They linger, shaping how you relate to God from a distance. These unadmitted questions often sound simple on the surface, yet they carry deep emotional weight. You wonder why God allowed something painful to happen when you were trying to do the right thing. You question why He feels silent when you need reassurance the most. You ask yourself whether His love is truly unconditional, or if it depends on how strong your faith remains. These questions do not come from arrogance. They come from vulnerability. They emerge when your heart wants to trust, but your experiences have left it cautious. Many people believe they must protect God from their doubts, as if honesty would damage the relationship. But love that cannot handle truth is not love at all. God's love is not sustained by your certainty. It is sustained by His nature. You are not responsible for keeping faith intact by hiding your questions. Faith grows when it is allowed to breathe, and breathing requires honesty. What makes hidden doubt so heavy is the loneliness it creates. When you cannot speak what you feel, you begin to carry it alone. You pray, but something holds back. You listen, but your heart remains guarded. Over time, this distance feels like separation, and you may assume God is the one stepping away. In reality, it is the silence you placed between yourself and Him out of fear of being seen too clearly. God does not respond to the version of you that pretends to be fine. He responds to the truth of who you are. He already knows the questions you are afraid to admit. He sees the hesitation behind your words and the uncertainty beneath your prayers. Nothing you hide surprises Him. What He waits for is not perfection, but openness. When doubts remain unspoken, they quietly shape your decisions. They influence how much you trust, how deeply you hope, and how close you allow yourself to feel. They become barriers not because they exist, but because they remain unaddressed. God's love does not ask you to erase these doubts. It asks you to bring them into the light where they lose their power to isolate you. The moment you allow yourself, you stop performing faith and start experiencing relationship. The fear of disappointing Him begins to dissolve, replaced by the realization that His love was never dependent on your certainty. He is not offended by your questions. He is present within them. Doubt that is acknowledged becomes a bridge instead of a wall. It opens space for God's love to respond, not with judgment, but with reassurance. And before any answer arrives, your heart learns something essential. You do not need to hide to remain loved. You do not need to be certain to be held. You only need to be honest. This is where God's love begins to answer your doubts, not by immediately resolving every question, but by restoring connection. When honesty replaces fear, distance fades. And where connection is restored, trust slowly begins to grow again. One of the deepest fears hidden beneath doubt is the fear that God might be disappointed with you. Not angry, not distant, but quietly disappointed. You begin to imagine that your questions have somehow lowered your value, that your uncertainty has made you less worthy of His attention. And because of that fear, doubt becomes heavier than it needs to be. It stops being a question and turns into a silent accusation against yourself. But God is not threatened by your questions. He is not destabilized by your uncertainty. He does not lose authority because you do not understand everything. Doubt may unsettle you, but it does not unsettle Him. His love is not fragile. It does not depend on your emotional stability or on the strength of your convictions. It is rooted in who He is, not in how consistently you feel confident. Many people confuse faith with certainty. They believe faith means never questioning, never hesitating, never struggling internally. But faith was never meant to silence the mind or deny the heart. Faith was meant to keep you connected even when understanding breaks down. Doubt does not scare God because doubt does not cancel connection unless you choose to withdraw. Questions do not push Him away. Silence does. God's love has always been relational, not conditional. He does not measure your worth by how well you hold yourself together. He does not step back when you are confused. He steps closer, not to lecture you, but to steady you. When doubt rises, it is often because something inside you is asking to be reassured, not corrected. You may expect God to respond to doubt with explanations or logic, but that is rarely how love answers. Love answers by presence, by staying, by refusing to abandon you while your thoughts are unsettled. God knows that answers alone do not heal the heart. Safety does. And before clarity can take root, your heart must feel safe enough to trust again. This is why God does not rush to silence your questions. He allows them to exist because He is more interested in the relationship than in maintaining appearances. A faith that never questions may look strong on the surface, but a faith that brings questions into the presence of God is far more resilient. It does not collapse when uncertainty appears. It deepens. When you realize that God is not offended by your doubts, a subtle shift begins. You stop bracing yourself emotionally. You stop filtering your prayers. You stop assuming that distance is the consequence of honesty. And in that moment, doubt loses its sharp edge. It no longer feels like a threat. It feels like an invitation. God's love answers doubt first by removing fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of disappointment. Fear of being seen as less faithful. When fear loosens its grip, the heart opens. And when the heart opens, trust has space to return. Not forced, not rushed, but real. You do not need to protect God from your questions. You need to let His love protect you from believing that your questions make you unworthy of Him. When that truth settles in, doubt no longer controls the relationship. It becomes part of the journey toward a faith that is deeper, steadier, and rooted in love rather than fear. There are moments when doubt does not come from disbelief, but from silence. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew. You pray and hear nothing. You wait and nothing changes. You look for reassurance, but all you feel is stillness. And slowly that stillness begins to feel personal. You start wondering if God has turned away, if you did something wrong, or if your faith has finally reached its limit. Silence has a way of amplifying fear. When answers do not come, the mind fills the gaps. It replays memories, mistakes, and unmet expectations. It asks whether God's promises were meant for someone else, someone stronger, someone more certain. And without realizing it, silence becomes interpreted as rejection rather than presence. But silence is not absence. It is one of the most misunderstood ways God works with the human heart. God often remains silent not because He has nothing to say, but because He is creating space for something deeper to form within you. Words can guide, but silence can reshape. Silence removes the illusion that faith survives on constant reassurance. It teaches the heart to rest in love rather than in answers. What makes silence so uncomfortable is that it removes control. When God speaks clearly, you feel oriented. When He remains quiet, you are forced to confront what you truly trust. Do you trust His voice only when you hear it? Or do you trust His love even when you do not? This is where doubt intensifies not as punishment but as exposure. Silence reveals whether faith is rooted in outcomes or in relationship. Many people assume that if God loved them, He would explain Himself. But love does not always explain. Love stays. Love holds. Love remains present even when words would not heal what is happening internally. God knows that sometimes explanations would only increase anxiety. Sometimes clarity would arrive too early. And sometimes what your heart needs most is not information, but reassurance that you are not alone in the waiting. Silence invites a different kind of listening, not with the ears, but with the inner posture of the heart. It slows you down. It strips away assumptions. It exposes the places where fear has been louder than trust. And in that exposure, God's love begins to work quietly, correcting not your questions, but the insecurity beneath them. When silence makes you question everything, it is not because God has withdrawn. It is because something inside you is being realigned. Silence interrupts patterns of dependence on constant confirmation. It teaches you to remain connected even when emotions fluctuate. And this is where doubt begins to lose its power. Not because answers arrive, but because the relationship deepens. God does not use silence to distance himself from you. He uses it to draw you inward, to a place where trust no longer depends on how clearly you hear him, but on how deeply you know his love. And once that foundation is restored, doubt no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like a moment of growth. Silence does not mean God is gone. It means he is doing something words cannot accomplish. And when that truth settles, the questions that once felt threatening begin to soften. They no longer ask whether God is present. They begin to ask how deeply you are willing to trust his love without needing constant proof. Doubt and distrust may sound similar, but they are born from very different places. Doubt asks questions because it wants to understand. Distrust withdraws because it no longer feels safe. One seeks clarity, the other builds distance. When these two become confused, many people begin to fear their own thoughts, believing that every question is a sign they are drifting away from God. But questioning does not mean you have stopped trusting. It often means your trust is being tested, stretched, and refined. Doubt appears when the mind tries to reconcile belief with experience. You believe God is good, yet something painful happened. You believe he is present, yet you feel alone. You believe he listens, yet answers did not arrive when you needed them. These tensions create questions, not because you want to abandon faith, but because you want faith that can survive reality. Doubt is the tension between what you believe and what you have lived. Distrust, on the other hand, is built when fear convinces you that God will not show up for you personally. It whispers that you are the exception, that others may experience his love, but you cannot rely on it fully. Distrust does not ask questions. It closes itself off to avoid disappointment. And this is where the danger lies, not in doubt itself, but in allowing doubt to harden into distance. God's love responds differently to each. Doubt is met with patience. Distrust is met with gentleness. God does not rush either. He understands that trust cannot be forced and certainty cannot be commanded. Trust grows when the heart feels safe enough to remain open, even when answers are delayed. Many people assume they must resolve doubt before they can trust again, but trust is not the reward for certainty. Trust is the decision to remain connected while uncertainty exists. You do not trust because everything makes sense. You trust because you choose not to walk away while you are still questioning. This choice is often quiet, internal, and unseen by others, but it is deeply significant. When you confuse doubt with distrust, you may withdraw emotionally from God, believing you must first fix your faith before approaching him again. But God's love does not wait for you to resolve your questions. It meets you in the middle of them. It understands that doubt, when held honestly, can become the place where trust is rebuilt on a stronger foundation. Trust does not eliminate doubt. It allows doubt to exist without controlling the relationship. It keeps the heart open instead of guarded. It continues to pray even when confidence feels thin. It stays present rather than retreating into isolation. And this is why God's love can answer doubt without removing it immediately. Love answers by creating safety, not by demanding resolution. As you begin to see the difference between questioning and withdrawing, something shifts. You stop accusing yourself for being honest. You stop interpreting uncertainty as failure. You realize that your doubts have not separated you from God. They have revealed where trust needs to be strengthened, not abandoned. God does not ask you to eliminate doubt before drawing near. He asks you not to let doubt turn into distance. When you allow His love to hold your questions instead of hiding them, trust begins to return naturally, not as blind certainty, but as quiet confidence rooted in relationship. Doubt may visit your faith, but it does not have to define it. Trust grows when love remains present, and God's love has never left, even while you were questioning. Doubt becomes destructive only when it is treated as an enemy instead of a signal. When you fight it, suppress it, or judge yourself for it, doubt hardens. But when you listen to what it is revealing, it begins to transform. Doubt often appears at the precise moment when your faith is ready to deepen. It surfaces when surface-level beliefs are no longer enough to carry the weight of your life. What once sustained you now feels insufficient, not because it was wrong, but because you have grown beyond it. Many people believe that strong faith means never questioning, but faith that never questions rarely matures. It remains dependent on formulas, expectations, and outcomes. When those structures fail, the faith built on them collapses. Doubt interrupts this cycle. It forces the heart to move beyond borrowed certainty into personal trust. It asks you to stop relying on what you were told and start engaging with what you are living. This is why doubt can become a door instead of a wall. A wall exists to protect you from vulnerability. A door invites you to step into something deeper. When doubt arises, it invites you to examine what you truly believe about God's love. Do you believe His love is consistent, or only present when things go well? Do you believe His care includes your confusion, or only your obedience? These questions are not threats, they are thresholds. God does not remove doubt immediately because He is not trying to preserve comfort. He is forming resilience. He allows doubt to surface, so faith can shed what is fragile and absorb what is real. Faith that has passed through doubt is quieter, humbler, and far more stable. It no longer depends on constant reassurance. It rests in relationship. When doubt is welcomed honestly, it stops isolating you. Instead of pulling away, you lean in. Instead of hiding, you become present. Instead of demanding answers, you begin to listen. And in that posture, God's love begins to answer in a different way. Not through instant explanations, but through steady presence that reshapes how you see Him and yourself. Many of the strongest believers are not those who never doubted, but those who allowed doubt to refine their trust. They learned that faith does not grow by avoiding questions, but by carrying them with God rather than against Him. Doubt stopped being a threat because love became the anchor. When doubt becomes a door, you stop asking whether God is still with you and start asking what He is teaching you about trust. The question shifts from fear to formation. You realize that doubt did not appear to push you away from God, but to invite you into a more honest, resilient, and mature faith. God's love does not fear the door that doubt opens. He stands on the other side of it, waiting. There are moments when belief remains intact, yet emotion feels absent. You still say the words. You still recognize the truth, but you no longer feel connected to it. God feels distant, not because you stopped believing, but because the warmth you once associated with faith seems gone. This creates a unique kind of doubt, one that is not intellectual, but emotional. You begin to wonder whether God's love has changed, or whether something inside you has closed without you noticing. Feelings are powerful, but they are not reliable guides for spiritual truth. They rise and fall with exhaustion, stress, disappointment, and unprocessed grief. When life has demanded too much for too long, the emotional system goes into protection mode. It dulls sensation to survive, and when this happens, faith can feel hollow, even while it remains present. The absence of feeling does not indicate the absence of God. It indicates a heart that has been under strain. Many people confuse emotional connection with spiritual reality. When they feel God, they believe He is near. When they do not, they assume He has withdrawn. But God's love is not governed by sensation. It does not fluctuate with mood or emotional energy. It remains steady even when you feel empty. And this is where doubt often intensifies because the mind looks for evidence and emotions offer none. God allows these seasons because they teach you something essential. Faith that depends on feeling will always be fragile. Faith that rests on love becomes stable. Emotional closeness is a gift, but it is not the foundation. The foundation is trust in God's character, not in your internal state. When feeling disappears, God invites you to learn how to remain connected without relying on emotional feedback. This is difficult because the human heart wants reassurance. It wants to feel warmth, peace, confirmation. But God's love answers this kind of doubt not by forcing emotion to return, but by strengthening trust beneath the surface. He teaches you that closeness does not require constant sensation. It requires presence, honesty, and willingness to stay. When you believe but do not feel God, doubt may whisper that something is wrong with you, that your faith is failing, that your connection has weakened. But the truth is simpler and deeper. Your faith is transitioning from emotional dependence into relational stability. You are learning to remain grounded even when feelings fluctuate. God's love does not leave when emotion fades. It stays quietly, steadily, faithfully. And over time, this teaches your heart something powerful. You are loved not because you feel it, but because it is true. And when this truth settles, doubt begins to lose its grip. The relationship no longer depends on how you feel today, but on who God has always been. This is not the loss of faith. It is the strengthening of it. When doubt takes hold, it rarely speaks in neutral language. It does not present itself as a simple question. It whispers interpretations, assumptions, and conclusions that feel convincing precisely because your heart is vulnerable. Doubt does not create lies out of nothing. It reshapes fragments of truth until they sound believable. And when you are tired, those whispers grow louder. It tells you that if God truly cared, things would look different by now. It suggests that unanswered prayers are proof of indifference. It frames delay as rejection and silence as neglect. These thoughts do not arrive as accusations. They arrive as explanations, offering relief from uncertainty by giving doubt a narrative. And that narrative slowly erodes trust. What makes these whispers powerful is timing. Doubt speaks when you are emotionally worn down, when hope has been stretched thin, when disappointment has accumulated without resolution. In those moments, the mind searches for meaning, and doubt is quick to provide one. Not a true one, but a coherent one. Fear prefers a painful explanation over no explanation at all. God's love does not argue with these lies by force. It exposes them by contrast. It reminds you that love is not proven by speed, nor measured by outcomes. Love is proven by presence. And God has not withdrawn from you, even when circumstances feel unresolved. The lie says you are forgotten. Love says you are seen. The lie says you are overlooked. Love says you are held. The lie says your faith has failed. Love says you are still here, still seeking, still open. Doubt often tells you that you are asking for too much, that expecting reassurance is selfish, that needing clarity is weakness. But love does not shame need. Love meets it. God's love understands that vulnerability does not disqualify you. It reveals where healing is needed. The lies of doubt lose power when they are named for what they are, not truths, but interpretations shaped by pain. When you begin to recognize these whispers, you gain distance from them. They stop sounding like facts and start sounding like fear. And fear loses its authority when love remains present. God does not demand that you silence every thought. He invites you to bring them into His presence where they can no longer isolate you. Doubt loses strength when it is no longer hidden. Lies weaken when they are exposed to love. And slowly, without force or urgency, the narrative begins to change. The questions remain, but they are no longer poisoned by fear. They become honest again. And honesty is where God's love answers, not by condemning doubt, but by restoring trust beneath it. There is a moment when you realize that waiting for every answer is exhausting you more than the doubt itself. You replay the same questions, hoping clarity will suddenly appear, but the cycle never truly ends. And slowly, something inside you begins to understand that peace is not arriving through explanation, it is arriving through release. Through the quiet decision to stop demanding certainty before allowing yourself to rest. God's love does not require you to understand everything in order to hold you. It does not wait for your doubts to be resolved before offering peace. Peace often comes first, not as a conclusion, but as an invitation. An invitation to trust that you are cared for even while questions remain unanswered. This is difficult because the mind wants closure, but the heart needs safety more than solutions. Many people delay surrender because they believe it means giving up the search for truth. But surrender is not resignation. It is choosing to let God love you without placing conditions on how or when He must explain Himself. It is allowing love to stabilize you before understanding arrives. When you accept this, something subtle shifts. Your questions lose their urgency. They no longer demand immediate answers to justify your faith. God's love speaks most clearly when you stop negotiating with it. When you stop saying, "I will trust you if you explain," and begin saying, "I will trust you even while I do not understand." This does not silence the mind, but it quiets the fear beneath the thoughts. It allows peace to exist alongside uncertainty, without being threatened by it. Letting God love you in the middle of doubt requires vulnerability. It means admitting that you cannot carry everything alone. It means allowing yourself to be supported rather than constantly proving your strength. And this is where love answers most deeply, not by fixing every question, but by reminding you that you are not abandoned in the process of asking them. As peace settles, you may notice that doubt no longer feels hostile. It becomes softer, less controlling. It stops pushing you toward conclusions and begins inviting reflection instead. This is the effect of love. Love does not eliminate questions. It changes how they affect you. It removes their power to destabilize your identity and your sense of belonging. When you allow God's love to hold you without conditions, trust begins to grow quietly. Not because everything makes sense, but because your heart no longer feels alone. You discover that love is not the reward for certainty. It is the foundation that allows faith to remain steady while certainty is still forming. In this space, doubt no longer feels like a threat. It becomes part of the journey, no longer defining it. And you begin to realize that God's love has been answering you all along, not by explaining everything, but by staying with you through it all. There comes a point when logic reaches its limit. You have analyzed, reflected, prayed, and searched for meaning, yet something inside you recognizes that understanding alone will not bring rest. Your mind can build explanations, but it cannot heal the uneasiness beneath them. This is where many people remain stuck, believing that if they could just think more clearly, their doubts would disappear. But doubt is not resolved by logic. It is quieted by love. God's love does not compete with your reasoning. It moves beneath it. Logic tries to control outcomes, to predict, to guarantee safety. Love offers something different. It offers presence without conditions. It does not require you to solve the mystery in order to feel secure. It reassures you that even without full understanding, you are not exposed or alone. When love begins to speak louder than logic, it does not overwhelm you with emotion. It steadies you. It creates an inner grounding that logic cannot produce. You may still have questions, but they no longer feel urgent. You may still lack answers, but they no longer define your sense of safety. Love shifts the center of gravity from the mind to the heart, not in a sentimental way, but in a stabilizing one. Many people resist this because they believe relying on love means abandoning reason. But God's love does not ask you to stop thinking. It asks you to stop making understanding the condition for peace. It teaches you that trust can exist before clarity, and that peace is not the result of having everything explained, but of knowing you are held by something greater than your doubts. This is why love often arrives quietly. It does not argue with your questions. It surrounds them. It creates enough inner calm that the questions lose their sharpness. And once that happens, doubt no longer dominates your attention. It becomes part of a larger landscape where trust has space to grow. When God's love speaks louder than logic, fear no longer drives your thoughts. You stop racing toward conclusions. You stop assuming the worst. You stop interpreting uncertainty as danger. Love reframes the experience. It reminds you that not knowing does not mean not being guided. This is not an abandonment of reason. It is the integration of it. Logic remains useful, but it no longer carries the burden of keeping you safe. Love does. And in that shift, doubt loosens its grip. It no longer demands answers to justify your faith. It allows faith to rest on something deeper than explanation. God's love does not silence the mind. It calms the heart beneath it. And when the heart is calm, the mind no longer needs to fight for certainty. It can wait. It can listen. It can trust. There is a kind of peace that arrives before understanding. It does not explain itself. It does not come with answers attached. It settles quietly, almost unexpectedly, in the middle of questions that are still unresolved. This peace feels unfamiliar because you were taught that calm comes after clarity, not before it. But God's love often works in the opposite order. It steadies you first, then allows understanding to grow later. This peace is not emotional excitement. It does not erase doubt. It does not suddenly make everything make sense. It simply creates enough inner stillness for fear to lose its urgency. You may still wonder. You may still question. But the anxiety that once surrounded those questions begins to loosen. The pressure to resolve everything immediately fades, replaced by a subtle confidence that you are not in danger. Many people resist this peace because it feels incomplete. They mistake it for avoidance or denial. But this peace is not an escape. It is preparation. It gives your heart room to breathe so that doubt no longer feels like a threat. Without this space, any answer God gives would be distorted by fear. Peace clears the ground, so truth can take root without being twisted by anxiety. God's love knows that understanding cannot enter a heart that feels unsafe. When the heart is tense, every answer becomes a new source of worry. Peace comes first because it restores safety. It tells your nervous system that you are not abandoned. It reminds your spirit that you are held. And once that foundation is restored, doubt begins to change shape. It no longer attacks. It invites reflection. This peace often arrives quietly during ordinary moments. It may appear when nothing externally changes. You notice that your breathing slows. Your thoughts no longer spiral as quickly. The questions remain, but they no longer dominate you. This is not because you have resolved them, but because love has interrupted fear's control over your attention. Understanding grows best in calm soil. God's love provides that soil by settling your heart before explaining your path. This is why peace is not the conclusion of faith. It is the beginning of deeper trust. It allows you to remain open without feeling threatened by what you do not yet know. When peace comes before understanding, doubt loses its ability to destabilize you. It no longer demands immediate resolution. It becomes part of a process instead of a crisis. And in this space, trust begins to mature, not as blind certainty, but as quiet assurance that even without answers, you are safe. This peace is not temporary relief. It is a signal that God's love is already at work beneath your questions. It reminds you that understanding will come in time, but you do not need to wait for it in order to rest. There comes a moment when doubt begins to lose its power, not because every question has been answered, but because it no longer controls how you see yourself or God. The thoughts may still appear, but they do not carry the same weight. They pass through your mind without settling in your heart. What once felt threatening now feels manageable. This is not because doubt disappeared, but because something stronger took its place. This shift happens when God's love becomes more real to you than your uncertainty. Love does not argue with doubt. It outgrows it. It redefines what matters most. You stop measuring your faith by how confident you feel and start recognizing it by how present you remain. Doubt loses influence when it no longer dictates your identity or your sense of belonging. Many people believe doubt must be defeated, but God does not treat it as an enemy to be destroyed. He treats it as a condition to be healed. When love enters the space doubt once occupied, fear has nothing left to work with. The urgency fades. The inner tension softens. You no longer feel the need to resolve everything immediately to feel secure. This is often when people realize that doubt was never the real problem. The problem was feeling alone while doubting. When God's love becomes tangible again, doubt no longer isolates you. It becomes a background noise rather than the main voice. And when isolation ends, doubt loses its ability to dominate your thoughts. You begin to notice that your reactions change. Situations that once triggered anxiety now invite patience. Questions that once demanded answers now invite reflection. You stop bracing yourself emotionally, waiting for faith to collapse. Instead, you find yourself standing more firmly, not because you know more, but because you trust more. God's love does not remove doubt by force. It replaces fear with reassurance. It shifts your attention from what you do not know to what you do know. You know you are not abandoned. You know you are not rejected. You know you are not required to be perfect in order to be loved. These truths anchor you when uncertainty arises. As doubt loses power, faith becomes quieter and stronger at the same time. It no longer needs to prove itself. It does not rely on emotional intensity. It rests. And in that rest, trust deepens naturally. You realize that doubt did not weaken your faith. It revealed where love needed to be more deeply received. This is the moment when doubt stops defining the journey. It no longer asks whether God is present. It begins to ask how you can remain open to His love, even when answers are still forming. And in that question, faith moves forward with steadiness instead of fear. At some point, doubt stops being something that happens to you and becomes a choice you respond to. Not a dramatic choice, not a public declaration, but a quiet internal decision about how you will live while questions still exist. You realize that waiting for complete certainty has kept you frozen longer than doubt ever did. And something inside you begins to understand that trust is not built after every question is answered, but while some of them remain open. Choosing trust does not mean ignoring your doubts. It means refusing to let them dictate your posture toward God. You stop approaching Him guarded, cautious, or withdrawn. You choose to stay present even when you do not fully understand. This choice is subtle, but it is powerful. It shifts your relationship with doubt from one of fear to one of awareness. Trust in this stage is not emotional confidence. It is commitment. It is the decision to keep your heart open instead of closing it to protect yourself from disappointment. It is choosing not to interpret uncertainty as danger. You allow yourself to live without demanding guarantees, knowing that God's love has never depended on your ability to predict the future. Many people assume that faith requires answers in order to move forward, but faith often grows precisely because answers are incomplete. Trust becomes real when it is exercised without proof, not recklessly, but relationally. You are not trusting an idea. You are trusting a presence. And presence does not require explanation to be real. When you choose trust in the middle of unanswered questions, something stabilizes inside you. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. You stop assuming that doubt means collapse. You begin to live with a different kind of strength, one that does not come from knowing what will happen, but from knowing who is with you. God's love meets this choice with consistency. He does not rush to fill every gap. He walks with you through them. And as you continue choosing trust, even quietly, even imperfectly, you begin to notice that your relationship with doubt has changed. It no longer feels like a threat waiting to undo you. It feels like part of the terrain you know how to navigate. This is where faith becomes grounded. Not dramatic, not loud, not dependent on certainty, but steady. You discover that trust does not require answers to survive. It requires connection. And connection remains strong when love is allowed to lead, even while questions remain. When trust becomes a choice instead of a feeling, doubt loses its power to stop you. It may still speak, but it no longer decides the direction of your heart. You are still held, even when questions remain, not held conditionally, not held cautiously, but fully and intentionally. There was never a moment when doubt loosened God's grip on you. There was never a question strong enough to push him away. His love did not pause while you searched for answers. It stayed. It watched. It waited with you. This is what becomes clear at the end of this journey. Doubt did not disqualify you. It did not interrupt God's presence in your life. It did not weaken his commitment to you. It revealed where your heart needed reassurance, not correction. And God answered that need, not by overwhelming you with explanations, but by remaining close enough for trust to grow again. You may not have all the answers you wanted. Some questions may still be open. Some uncertainties may still exist, but something far more important has settled inside you. You no longer feel alone in your questioning. You no longer feel afraid of your own thoughts. You no longer interpret doubt as a threat to your faith. You understand now that faith is not the absence of questions, but the presence of love that does not leave when questions arise. God's love has been answering you quietly throughout this entire process. It answered by giving you space instead of pressure. It answered by offering peace before understanding. It answered by reminding you that you are valued even when uncertain. It answered by staying present when silence felt uncomfortable. And in doing so, it restored something deeper than certainty. It restored trust. You are not required to resolve every doubt to be loved. You are not required to understand everything to be held. You are not required to feel strong in order to remain connected. God's love does not wait on your confidence. It surrounds you in your vulnerability. This is where the journey leads. Not to perfect clarity, but to secure belonging. Not to unshakable certainty, but to unshakable love. When you know you are held, doubt loses its power to define you. It becomes part of your story, not the end of it. You are still here. You are still open. You are still reaching. And that alone speaks of a faith that has not collapsed but matured. God's love did not answer your doubts by removing every question. It answered them by never leaving you alone with them. And that is enough. As it says in Psalm 34:4, I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. You may have come here carrying questions you were afraid to admit, doubts you tried to silence, and a faith that felt quieter than it used to be. But notice what has happened along this journey. You are still here, still open, still listening. That alone is proof that God's love has never stopped holding you. God did not wait for your doubts to disappear before drawing near. He met you inside them. He answered not by overwhelming you with explanations, but by restoring something far more important than certainty. He restored your sense of being seen, safe, and loved. When fear tried to convince you that questioning meant distance, love stayed close. When uncertainty tried to define you, love reminded you who you belong to. You do not need perfect answers to walk forward. You do not need unshakable confidence to be guided. You only need to remain open to a love that has never withdrawn from you. Doubt no longer has the final word. God's love does. Carry this with you. When questions return, remember that you are not facing them alone. You are held. You are guided, and you are loved more deeply than your doubts could ever reach.